A cover-up at the highest levels of our government surrounding 9/11.
They were on this fact-finding mission trying to figure out what intelligence was available to help fill in the missing gaps relating to the failures before 9/11. I volunteered to my Army chain of command and said, they may already know about this. As a matter of fact, they probably do. But just in case they don't, here's a one-page summary of what I want to talk to them about, and I'd like to give them the background on Able Danger.
All right. You have given me a copy of that summary. You have given me a copy of your notes of your conversation with Professor Zelikow.
Yes.
And one of the things says, I'm quoting this directly, Colonel, CIA undermined sub-sources. What does that mean?
This is where we're in a gray area by the fact the Pentagon, I've testified to this fact, and now the Pentagon's pulled it back out, which you need to ask, why would the Pentagon pull something out which is now 10 years old, which was actually my original testimony?
What is it?
Well, the issue has to do with an asset that we were using for the actual spearhead of the Able Danger project.
When you say an asset, you mean a human being providing you information about the bad guys?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Okay, what became of that human being?
Well, in this particular operation, one of the reasons I reported it to Dr. Zelikow as part of the Able Danger project, he was going to be used to do some what we call black operation support for this project. What happened was CIA protested his operational existence because they were at the time running a parallel operation called out of Alex Base, and because of that conflict, supposedly CIA went to Congress and said, this guy's bad. He killed his wife. They're
not talking about you. They're talking about the asset.
Talking about the asset.
The person in Afghanistan.
Yeah, they used the excuse of that he supposedly killed his wife and ran drugs, which most people did.
Did this guy provide you and the Defense Intelligence Agency for which you worked, the Pentagon, with actionable information?
He was consistently doing it, yes.
He was consistently doing it. And the CIA wanted him neutralized because he was your asset and not theirs.
That's correct.
Is that fair?
That is correct.
When you came back to the United States and wanted to tell the 9/11 Commission that the CIA had squelched you from dealing with this asset, this human being,
right?
What happened?
Well, it was like the Twilight Zone. After the initial disclosure, Dr. Zelikow came to me at the end of the meeting, gave me his card and said, what you said today is critically important, very important. Please come see me when we return to Washington, D.C. I returned to Washington, D.C., January of 2004. Call in. They say, we want to see you. Stand by. Nothing happens. A week goes by. I call again. They say, we don't need you to come in. We have all the information on Able Danger we need. Thank you anyway. And that was where it ended.
All right, so the information that you told Dr. Zelikow in Afghanistan about the CIA interfering with your ability to provide actionable intelligence to the United States government, intelligence that might have helped them find out who caused 9/11, you were not permitted to testify about.
That's correct.
Okay. Did you ever have a conversation with anybody on the 9/11 Commission, any one of the actual commissioners, about what you knew, when you knew it, what he knew, and when he knew it?
In September of 2005, I met with one of the members of the 9/11 Commission in Philadelphia. I had a lunch with him, and during this lunch, I provided to him all the background that we're talking about now and in greater detail. During that meeting, he confirmed to me that he had never heard any of this, and had he heard of it, it would have been something that was very much of interest to he and the Commission.
All right, at the time you met with this 9/11 Commissioner in Philadelphia in 2005, correct me on my dates, the 9/11 report, that 500-page monstrosity that a lot of us, certainly in this business, read, had it been published yet?
It had been published and out, yes.
Okay, so it was published without the benefit of what you knew.
Right.
Did you ask him at that lunch meeting in Philadelphia whether or not anybody on the 9/11 Commission had an agenda, or was covering up for somebody, or was protecting somebody?
The essence I received, and I asked that question directly about what the nature was of why they did, what was the focus of the Commission. And during that conversation, this commissioner said flat out that everybody on the Commission was covering for someone. Now,
let me hear that again. Everybody on the Commission, you mean the commissioners themselves, was covering for someone?
That was the way I interpret that statement, yes.
What do you think he meant? Did you ever ask him what he meant by that?
Well, I did, and the clarification was the fact, and they talked about the Jamie Gorelick issue. A number of the commissioners, to include this one, felt that Jamie Gorelick should never have been on a commission because of some of the causal actions and effects of her actions within the context of the 9/11.
Jamie Gorelick was a Deputy Attorney General in the Clinton administration on the 9/11 Commission during the Bush administration. While she was in the Clinton administration, she basically said to intelligence, you can't talk to law enforcement.
That's
and to
correct.
law enforcement, you can't talk to intelligence.
That's correct.
That was the problem with
the Wall
her.
memo, yes, sir.
Okay, were members of the 9/11 Commission, did they each have their own agenda, according to your friend on the Commission?
That's correct. Everybody had some issue they were looking at for someone else.
Wow. So there's a lot of things that never made it in that 9/11 report.
Judge, that is the bottom line, and I think it's been revealed over and over for the past 2 years that things were either by negligence left out or, and I believe, by purpose left out.
It's Operation Able Danger, which right now leads on FoxNews.com as our lead story. Catherine Herridge doing some follow-up on what we knew about Mohammed Atta leading up to 9/11.
That's right. Some witnesses, apparently there was a redacted form of what people in the intelligence community knew regarding that man right there, Mohammed Atta, and in the Able Danger program. And apparently the report had been redacted. All the names had been blacked out. Well, FoxNews.com got a clean copy and called a number of the witnesses, 5 in all. All of them said that we told investigators one thing, and none of those things actually showed up in the 9/11 Commission. And in fact, the investigators from the Department of Defense were a little agitated and seemed aggressive.
So why wouldn't that show up in that report? Well, these 5 witnesses claimed that the Defense Department was worried about taking some of the blame for 9/11. But here's what I don't understand. Why wouldn't they put in the report these findings? Because maybe that would look at least like they were kind of following the trail of Mohammed Atta, instead of just having this whole situation happen. You know, at least it gives the American public the image that at least we're kind of onto him.
Yeah, but
I don't know which one's worse.
But were we onto him, and did we have a picture of him, and did we know that? Did we know him by name? And the name at that point was Mohammed El Sayed. And if we did know him, why didn't we stop him? That's the problem.
But does it look any worse than in August, Bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S.? That looks bad. There was so many mistakes. There was so many times where we had a chance to get Bin Laden. You can go back and back and back. But for some reason, the Defense Department put their line in the sand and said these 5 people that brought up the fact that we were tracking a cell that included Mohammed Atta in it leading up to 9/11 was redacted, not included. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer would not stand for this. He said it was called Operation Able Danger, and we were tracking Mohammed Atta. And when he was interviewed by Phil Zelkow, who ended up joining the State Department, he said, you know, Tony, this is an important part of the story. We'll make sure it's in the 9/11 report. And it wasn't. There was no follow-up. And Colonel Schaefer would not be corralled. Now, I don't understand how this led to Operation Dark Heart and the purchases of 9,500 books by the Defense Department that were hensely destroyed.
That were written by Schaefer.
Written by Schaefer.
His new book.
They burned them.
They did.
They're going to make him a bestseller. And they're burning his books as if that's going to stop it. As if we're going to be out of ink. We're not going to make other books?
Sure. Well, according to Colonel Dave LePan, Assistant to the Secretary of Defense, he says the investigation found that prior to September 11, 2001, Able Danger team members did not identify Mohammed Atta or any other 9/11 hijacker, while 4 witnesses claim to have seen a chart depicting Mohammed Atta and possibly other hijackers or cells involved in 9/11. The investigation determined that their recollections were not accurate. So in other words, they talked to a bunch of people and they said, yeah, I remember that exactly. Well, according to the Department of Defense, they were wrong.
Well, what's going on? Because some people who agreed to speak to FoxNews.com did so without giving their names because they fear repercussions. I mean, come on. What kind of repercussions could there? I mean, I believe that they fear repercussions. What I'm saying is, why should they be put in that position where they would actually fear that? I mean, are we all on the same team here?
What the Colonel is absolutely correct on is that the 9/11 Commission and the commissioners themselves were just there to whitewash it. They were blessed with the most brilliant staff you could imagine. But as commissioners, they were clearly there to not let the American people know what happened before 9/11.
Well, was the 9/11 Commission report a whitewash, as Colonel Schaefer says, and as one of the 9/11 commissioners to whom he spoke, and you heard him talk about this person, pretty much agrees?
It was a whitewash and a lie from top to bottom.
What do you mean a lie from top to bottom, Michael?
Well, in my own case, sir, the agency officers who were involved before 9/11 in chasing Bin Laden decided that we could not simply testify under oath without providing supporting documentation. And so all of us both testified under oath. I did, I think, 3 times.
Right.
And provided documents. And I provided myself, let me speak just for myself here, Judge. I provided a 3-inch binder with over 400 pages of documentation not my notes, but official government documents
about
the failures before 9/11. I never heard one word back from Zelikow. And I approached Zelikow. He asked me for the notebook. I told him it was available. He asked me for it, and he never got in touch to talk about one page of material.
You obviously know what was in the loose leaf, and I know you read the 9/11 Commission report. Did anything from the loose leaf make its way into the final report?
Nothing that would have been astounding. Let me retrace that, sir. Not the important stuff. The important stuff did not. The failure of George Tenet, for example, to impose order on the intelligence community.
Okay.
The failure of the President of the United States to kill Osama bin Laden. All the important things were not reflected in that.
Before I let you go,
report.
you say that you agree with Colonel Schaefer that members of the 9/11 Commission were covering up for other people. For whom were they covering up, in Michael Scheuer's opinion?
Both parties, sir. There was such endemic failure in the Republican administration under Bush, but especially the Democratic administration under Clinton, that I'm very sure they felt that the American people would be shocked by the negligence of its political officers, of the people it elected to office. I personally talked to Zelikow several times, to a guy named Ben Venista a couple times.
Right.
They all seemed very interested in what you had to say, but at the end of the day, it didn't make it into the report.
The government knew about some phone call from a safe house in Afghanistan into the U.S. about 9/11, before 9/11, and even though it had the same FISA courts and the same right to act against international targets in 2001 as it does now, you didn't do anything about it? Well, this would seem to leave only two options. Either the Attorney General just admitted that the government for which he works is guilty of malfeasant complicity in the 9/11 attacks, or he's lying.
Well, 2009, Barack Obama sworn in as the President of the United States. 36,000 American troops are in Afghanistan at that time. In February, President Obama adds 17,000 U.S. troops to the combat zone. Counterterrorism expert General Stanley McChrystal is named the commander of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Elections are held, Taliban attacks continue, and there are charges of widespread fraud in those elections. In October of 2009, President Obama increases U.S. troop presence by 30,000 in Afghanistan. Now, 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. President Obama announces he will start troop withdrawal by July of 2011, almost a year from now. 2010, this year, the American death toll in Afghanistan soars. By the end of summer, 1,015 American troops have been killed in the war. General David Petraeus takes over command of U.S. forces, and the war now continues with no end in sight.
We're now 9 years into this war in Afghanistan. The suicide rates, PTSD rates continue to rise. So have the mental wounds of this war kind of turned into really the elephant in the room here?
I think it was for a long time. It was exactly that. No one talked very much about it because, in part, it was a vague diagnosis. It was hard to, you don't have a blood test or a specific imaging test that can diagnose PTSD.
And I'm sure some people just didn't want to let on that it was happening.
They didn't want to let on. There's a stigma attached to mental illness that we talk about all the time. But I think now it's inescapable when you look at some of the numbers and the impact this has had. I think it's staggering to sort of think about numbers like how many people have been hospitalized as a result of mental illness as compared to physical wounds. Take a look there, Don. I mean, I think these numbers here, they say it all. More people now in this past year were hospitalized for mental health issues as compared to physical injuries. These are U.S. troops, and keep in mind, Don, as you well know, a lot of people, they never come forward. So that 17,000 number, it's a gross underestimation of just how profound this is. Suicide rate 4 times higher. 4 times higher among U.S. troops than the civilian population. Yeah. It's no longer the elephant in the room.
Well, and there are a lot of things here. Usually, even in civilian life, people don't like to talk about. There's a stigma attached to it there. And then when you're in a group of, your guys, it's mostly men, obviously, the military guys, and they would have the bravado. They don't want to talk about that as well. But I wonder about this. We did the story on the young man. Some people are redeployed 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times. These deployments, the multiple deployments, what's that doing to this?
Well, there's no question that we have real data, real objective data. It's not guesswork anymore in terms of the rate of PTSD among people who are deployed rather more than once. The likelihood of developing mental illness is 2.5 times higher in someone who's deployed twice versus just once. And as you mentioned, people are deployed many, many times.
So I just thought I'd just pop in to say, boo.